Well, I'll be discussing about animal welfare. I don't know how many of you will be interested in knowing about animal welfare. In fact, as we have become conscious of animal welfare, we have understood more about its importance. Its importance on two grounds. One is on moral ground. The animals being live animals, live creatures, they also have the sensitivity to face pain, to face inconveniences. So that in turn affects animals' health, and as animals' health is affected, that ultimately affects animals' productivity. That is where you might find some interest in the topic. Otherwise, uh, I find this topic somewhat misfit for this program since I've been given it, so I'll have to delve on it. Otherwise, I would have been appropriate for talking on animal health management, and most of you would find interest in that. Anyway, since this has been given to me, so we'll discuss about animal welfare. फॉरवर्ड की थोड़ी सी यहाँ से हाँ मैं नहीं कहूँ well, there are many definitions given for animal welfare. The most convenient thing to understand, most simple language to understand animal welfare is that animal must experience a quality life where the animal is comfortable with the environment. That is a definition that satisfies all components of welfare. This also discusses about human-animal interactions. In fact, if the human is not sensitive to animals being a live creature and sensitive to pain and insults, the human being will not deal animals in a way where the animal feels comfortable. If you see in our day-to-day life, as we pass across a road and if you find some animal there, either you will throw a stone on it or you will kick it, you will hit it. ये नॉर्म है, हमारे बच्चे ऐसे ही करते हैं, हम भी कई बार ऐसे ही करते हैं, because we are not sensitized to the welfare of the animals. So these poor creatures, they simply suffer, and when our interference goes beyond a limit, the animal shows clear-cut signs of stress. So as long as we are below the threshold level, the animal is not in a position to express its unpleasant experience with the humans in its vicinity. What it does is that it suffers, it stresses, its metabolism is altered, its feed conversion is altered, and ultimately the productivity of the animal is affected. In fact, uh, I was purely prepared to discuss animal welfare and its legislation, but since I believe this group will not be much interested in that, so I'll be skipping most of the things. uh, how we can measure how much the animal is affected or what we mean by animal welfare, how much welfare is being done. In fact, this is a very difficult subject to explain. So people have been trying to find an explanation how we can say that how much welfare is being done and how much is not being done. So this is what one of the definitions, one of the protocols that has been assigned by British researchers: freedom from hunger, freedom from discomfort, freedom from pain, and the animal should have freedom to express its behavior. That means animal should have that ambience where it can express its behavior. For example, if you take an example of a monkey is used to hover over the trees across the branches. If you put that monkey in a closed room, this is not the place where the animal feels comfortable. So it is trust. It will survive, but it is trust. So that is not the place where it can express its behavior. Then freedom from fear and distrust. Same hai, if you have two animals placed in two enclosures side by side, you have goat in one enclosure and a lion in another enclosure. The goat will not survive long there, right? So that is where the animal should have congenial ambience wherein it can express its behavior, wherein it can satisfy its needs. Well, animal ethics is a term which simply deals with human relation with the animals, how human understands animals' problems, how human deals with the animals. It includes animal rights, animal welfare, animal laws, including wild animals also. Of course, when we discuss of animal rights, many a times we believe, we feel that animal rights are being overemphasized. In certain instances, a very small insult to an animal invites a very big punishment. Sometimes it appears disproportionate, but you got to have a legislation to regulate our environment, because we have not been expressing our commitment and our sense of discipline to the order of nature. These are the four domains of animal welfare where we say that animal is being dealt well, giving good nutrition, good environment, and taking care of animals' health, and giving environment to express its behavior. So when these things are being addressed, we can say that the animal welfare is being addressed, the animal is being dealt well. Well, uh, talking about historical perspective of animal welfare. If you see, the earliest references of animal welfare come from the religious scriptures. Almost all religious scriptures have a mention of animal welfare. Most of the religious scriptures, they talk of animals being living creatures, should be dealt well, should not be subjected to unnecessary pain and suffering. The only problem here is that though we claim to follow these religious scriptures in letter and spirit, but we are not sensitive to most of the guidelines that are prescribed in these scriptures. So, one of the guidelines there is our compassion to animals. I have tried to find out references from different religious scriptures. So, in these scriptures, have there some verses which talk of animals' welfare. Take animals as your children. They also can suffer. They also need passion. They also need love, affection. Then Bible also has some references on animal welfare, but more elaborate details are there in Islamic scriptures. Holy Quran has many verses which refer to animal welfare, and but most of these verses have been elaborated then by Prophet Sallallahu his sayings on animal welfare. You can read that there from the narrations of Prophet Sallallahu 13 points have been drawn which talk of animal welfare. I think this gives us the practical guidelines of what we mean by animal welfare, and this is what people across the globe working in the discipline of animal welfare have been highlighting in one way or the other. So, if we are believers, then we should follow these principles as a sign of our belief, our iman, right? You can read them; they are there. I don't need to go through in details, but almost all the components of animal welfare that will be dealing elsewhere are there in those prophets' sayings. Well, Ireland was the first country which established legislation for animal welfare as early as 1635. This is the spelling flowing. It's flowing what we use Plough, but it is their then language, English language, wherein they have written. Uh, there used to be a tradition wherein they would use these bullocks for plowing, and they would control this bullock by holding its tail. So that would inflict injury to tail, that would give a lot of pain to the animal. So that's where they started enacting laws to regulate pain and suffering to the animals. It started from there. So since then, across the globe, people have been talking of animal welfare, but they were the first to start it. These are the acts of cruelty towards animals, not being provided sufficient food or water. In fact, now when we take charge of establishing an animal farm as an enterprise, then it becomes our responsibility that we don't subject these animals to any sort of stress. Not feeding well these animals means subjecting them to stress, and it is sinful at the first instance. It is sinful if I am in charge of an animal and I am not feeding it well. It is sinful for me. I'll be taken to account by Almighty on the day of judgment for that. So that's where the animal welfare is to be taken at the first instance. Abandoning an animal, harsh climate condition होती है, you leave the animals on their own, so they suffer silently. They are not in a position to come to you and explain their agony, but they suffer silently. They suffer because of our negligence. So we stand responsible for that. Animal testing, that is experimentation on animals. So whatever advancements science is making in health sciences, that is mostly standardized on animals. We have seen we have been using animals for experimentation. We know how much pain we inflict on these animals. By that, I don't mean that we should stop working on this. We should stop testing the drugs in animals first before putting them to human use. But we got to follow some ethics in that. We should not use laboratory animals for the fun of it. We should use as minimum number of animals as possible. We should try to avoid inflicting injuries to these animals unnecessarily, which are not part of our experiment. And after doing the experiment, we should take it responsibility that we have to take care of these animals and relieve them of the agony which is because of our experimentation on these animals. There's a concept here. Then putting animals in unsanitary conditions. That's the picture from one Gaushala wherein animals have been sheltered. Take, what they claim is that animals are being taken from streets and they are being sheltered. They are being provided congenial atmosphere. You can see how bad the situation there is. So subjecting animals to this in itself means cruelty to animals. Well, this one slide might interest you. Animals under herd management. See, when we are establishing a farm of animals, as I said earlier, it becomes our responsibility to see to that we are not subjecting these animals to any sort of stress. We have to manage them well, manage them following those four basic necessities of the animals. Nourish them very well, provide them good amount of space. Factory farming violates rights of animals and cannot be regarded as an ethical farming. Do you know what you mean by factory farming? Anybody here? No. Well, what we call as advanced farming systems, which are by and large practiced in West, wherein animals are managed in a way wherein we have more of economic returns. So there our consideration remains economic return, not welfare of the animal, not comfort of the animal, not how much agony the animal faces. So our objective here remains how much economic activity we can make out of this animal. So they rear them under such circumstances wherein most economic activity is available, but these animals don't get the environment they need for their well-being. So we deprive these animals of that comfort, right? That's what is called factory farming. कहते हैं ना कि जैसे यहाँ भी हम कहते हैं काम ही काम करता है, मशीन बन गए आदमी. So that's how making animals machines of economic activity, right? So that's factory farming. So though that's a good economic activity, but that's unethical because it is subjecting animals to stress. In an estimate, about 74% livestock was factory farmed in US in 23. Most of the farms there are sort of factory farming, extremely intensive farming system. They provide very little space to the animal so that animal doesn't make movements, because when animal makes movement, it spends energy on that. Spending energy means more food on that, right? We want all the food that we provide, it comes back in terms of meat or milk, whatever we want from that animal. So giving less scope for the animal to make movements means spending less energy on its survival, more for the produce that we need from that animal. Uh, this is a significant observation. Around 15% increase in milk production was observed when animals were let loose in the barn. हमारे यहाँ डेयरी फार्म का क्या कॉन्सेप्ट है? वे स्ट्रक्चर द फॉर्म आपको पढ़ा, ये वो बता भी देंगे कि कैसे फॉर्म होना चाहिए, कितनी स्पेस एक एनिमल के लिए होनी चाहिए, जिसमें ऑफ स्पेस फॉर द एनिमल, और यहाँ पे बीच में आप वो रखेंगे पार्टीशंस सो दैट एनिमल कैन नॉट मेक मच मूवमेंट, राइट? दैट इज वन. एंड यू कीप एनिमल टाइट, और रस्सी भी लंबी नहीं होनी चाहिए, जहाँ एनिमल ज़्यादा मूवमेंट करेगा पीछे जाएगा, फिर वो हाइजीन मेंटेन नहीं होती है. दिस द कन्वेंशन दैट वी फॉलो, राइट? बट keeping an animal tied in itself is distrust to the animal. Animal is not born with the rope in its neck, right? आपको एक कमरे में दिन भर बैठने के लिए कहेंगे तो how will you feel about that? Animal express नहीं करेगा. As Imran Khan puts it, we have to be political to survive. Animals are not political, that's why they are being preyed upon. So वो पॉलिटिकल नहीं है, वो ऑर्गेनाइजेशन नहीं बना सकते हैं, वो अपना वो आवाज़ नहीं उठा पाते, बट दे सफर साइलेंटली, giving us further chance to subjugate them. So that's what we are doing here. So it has been observed that when animals were let loose, not being tied with the rope, 15% increase in milk yield was observed, giving the same nutrition, same breed of animal, same location. So why so? Because these animals, they found themselves liberated. They were not tied. They could make movements of their choice. जब बैठना चाहते बैठेंगे, जब खड़े होना चाहते खड़े हो जाएंगे, making movements around, right? So that gives a feeling to the animal, feeling of well-being to the animals. Its metabolism is accordingly in a state of balance, wherein optimum productivity can be expected from the animal. Stress means decreased productivity. Straight in a simple language. किसी टाइप का भी स्ट्रेस होगा, एनिमल के पैर में जख्म होगा, उससे भी प्रोडक्टिविटी कम होगी, राइट? एनिमल को साइकोलॉजिकल डिस्कम्फर्ट होगा, प्रोडक्टिविटी इफेक्ट होगी. सो दैट्स वेयर वेलफेयर काउंट्स फॉर इकोनॉमिक एक्टिविटी ऑल्सो. Well, now देयर हैव बीन, आजकल तो काफ़ी सारी रिसर्च होते हैं, हर चीज़ के लिए इंडेक्सिंग होती है. एनिमल वेलफेयर के लिए भी इंडेक्सिंग हो चुकी है कंट्रीज़ की. विच कंट्री है, जैसे वो ह्यूमन डेवलपमेंट इंडेक्स होता है ना, likewise there has been indexing for animal welfare also. There is a big organization having global presence. They have been working on it. In fact, it is under the auspices of OIE, which is International Organization for Maintaining Animal Health. So they have indexed 50 countries for their commitment to animal welfare, and in that they enlisted top 10 countries. Of course, none of countries from this side was in that, but India is very close to that. I think on 12th or 13th serial. So a sort of satisfactory state still. Australia being on top of it, then Switzerland, Germany, Netherlands. These are the countries which remain ahead of us in every aspect. So ahead of us in animal welfare as well. Now, since we are not maintaining our morals, we are not following our religious scriptures, so there has got to be a lathi to control us, to force us to follow animal welfare. That is why legislation comes there, right? So government has to make some legislation to force people maintain animal welfare. Every country has its own legislation for maintaining animal welfare, and India, in fact, in its constitution only there are certain clauses which talk of compassion to animals. When that didn't work, then came the Prevention of Cruelty to Animals Act 1960. That was the first act that talked of animal welfare, and that in fact enlisted what are the acts of cruelty on animals, and it should be penalized. There are laws which penalize a person for committing any act of cruelty on animal. So these are some of the laws which are in place for uh, protecting animals' welfare. And this CPCSCA, uh, that is हाँ, इसमें नहीं आता है एनीवे दीवार में तो आता है उस पर नहीं आता एनीवे CPCSCA, this is committee for the uh, purpose of control and supervision of experimentation in animals. That is one set of laws which was enacted to regulate experimentation on animals. When it was found that people were using animals for experimentation without seeing how much of output we are going to get from it, and using large number of animals, subjecting them to agony, subjecting them to a lot of discomfort. So for that, this law was enacted. Now there is very strict regulation for experimentation on animals. If you have to make a program for some experiment on animals, there has got to be a lot of paperwork. You have to get permission, and permission is not easily got. At times, as scientists, we would get really disturbed with this. कि अब हमें एक्सरसाइज भी नहीं करने देंगे. You have to ask so many people. You have to write so many letters. You have to draw out a protocol. आप कैसे यूज करेंगे, क्यों इतने animals, you have to justify why you want this many animals to be used for this experiment, and what's your expected outcome of from this experiment. How do you justify using animals for this uh, experiment? Why can't you do it without animals? If you are doing it animals, how much output will be there? Is it commensurate with the number of animals you are using for experimentation? All these things, it is so difficult to get permission to use animals for experimentation. Tough regulation for that also, because we have been subjecting animals to discomfort. Then there is animal birth control for dogs, particularly since stray dogs increase in population. They have their own nuisance there, but they too have a right to live. They too have a right to have a comfort. So taking all those things in consideration, there is a national program for maintaining a steady balance of dog population. For that, what is recommended earlier, what we used to do was that we used to poison them, kill them, and killing them with strychnine. That is such a poison which gives a very painful death to the animal. Since that violates animals' rights, that has been done away with. So as of now, the only thing that is recommended is birth control. So there is a lot of money for that. We also have one center here where dog population control measures are being attended. OIE is the international body which is responsible for maintaining animal health and welfare internationally. It is being recognized by UNO and all world organizations. Most countries of the world, around 180 countries, they uh, accept these regulations for animal health and animal welfare. They work for animal trade also. That's why they have to have recognition by WTO. Now they set up standards uh, for measurement of animal welfare, and the member countries, they accept their standards and they follow their regulations in accordance with that. So they have these publications in which they publish their standards that they prescribe from time to time. So starting in 2004, they have been constantly revising these regulations. Then there are so many organizations which are working in animal welfare. NGOs का तो आपको हिसाब ही नहीं है. I have mentioned some which are very prominent in it. There are so many more organizations. Some are really working, some are just not working, but it's just giving just an impression of how much serious the issue is being taken, that many NGOs also are working in this field, and they are being funded also by government. These are some international organizations. Many of them are working in India also, and we have seen that they have very huge programs, lot of funding for maintaining animal rights. So to conclude, uh, this animal welfare needs to be taken as a concern, and of course, as we see, there are many legislative regulations on animal welfare, but the implementation is lagging, and as a consequence, we really don't see. Have you ever heard of anybody being penalized for doing some cruelty to animals? किसी ने कभी सुना है? Though we have laws on it. In fact, the first act that was in 1960, Prevention of Cruelty to Animals Act, but we never knew. We have been teaching it, we have been reading it, we have been studying it. We never knew if an act of cruelty is being done to the animal, to whom to convey, who should take the matter. It was not mentioned anywhere. So during the last few years, there have been revision of the rules, and it has now been clearly mentioned. If an act of cruelty is there, if animal rights are being violated, whom to refer to, and what can be the penalty. So these things are now being addressed. Uh, what I understand is that there's a need to sensitize people about animal welfare. We should understand. चलते चलते हम एनिमल को किक करते हैं कि भाई इसको भी तो तकलीफ होती है. We do it just for the fun of it. ये तो हम करते हैं, आजकल भी हम करते हैं. We are doing it without knowing that this is also a life. It also faces. अगर हम मुझे कोई किक करता है तो मुझे तकलीफ होती है, एनिमल को भी तकलीफ होती है. The thing is that it cannot cry the way I do. So we need to people to be sensitized that animals also feel the pain and agony, so they should be dealt compassionately. That's what I want to be taken serious. Topics of on animal welfare need to be introduced in both formal and religious education curricula. I think there is a period where from the sensitization could start. अगर बच्चों को पहले से ही कहा जाएगा कि एनिमल्स की भी लाइफ होती है, उनको भी तकलीफ होती है, उनको डेलिकेटली हैंडल करना चाहिए, तो एक इम्प्रेशन उसकी रहेगी उसकी फ्यूचर लाइफ में. So I think that is one important point that we need to take seriously now. Thank you very much.
Anybody needs to ask something?
Any question? Sir, on behalf of course coordinator and the division of veterinary epidemiology and medicine. Thank you a lot, and we also owe you a lot, sir. Thank you very much.